Thursday night football, Amazon Prime Video. We had an NFC East divisional matchup with Washington going into Philly to play the Eagles. Great matchup on paper. The game itself ended up not really delivering. Kind of had a similar situation, although the game itself was not as competitive, but similar to last week with Cincinnati and Baltimore, where things were a little slow, at least offensively, in the first half, and the majority of the scoring came in the second half. But really, just the game, whether it's because it's a short week, I thought we would see much more competitive football. You were talking about a Washington team that comes in, and if they win, they pull into a tie for first. The Eagles, with a win, would separate themselves, a little bit more breathing room as we move deeper into the second half here. Not the ideal setup for viewing on Thursday night, that's for sure. Was traveling Thursday afternoon, so basically watched in the terminal and on the plane, basically the first quarter up until maybe a few minutes left. I saw the Brian Robinson touchdown, was dead tired, so decided I needed to knock out for about the 1 hour flight. And then came to when we were just about to land and pulled up Prime Video again when I was close enough to get some reception and saw the end of the first half. So realized when I came to that I did not miss much, but we went into halftime with a close game. And then on the drive back from the airport, stopped for some food, so I pretty much saw none of the third quarter. As I was pulling in the last few minutes, I popped on the old Fantasy XM channel, and the guys had said Jalen Hurts just scored on the tush push. So by the time I then got inside, got unpacked, got the suitcase out, turned on Prime Video in my usual setup, watching on my own TV, it was the very beginning of the fourth quarter. It was coming off of the Hurts touchdown, and I see that the score is 12-10. And I'm thinking, Nick Sirianni strikes again. And going into the mini-bye, that is going to feel like a long time for that Philly fan base to get on him if that would have came back to bite them. Obviously, at the time, I was not aware that Jake Elliott missed the extra point, but given what we've seen from Sirianni thus far, he doesn't exactly get the benefit of the doubt there. So, was incorrect with the assumption that they went for two. But anyway, 12-10, Washington gets the ball back, and they immediately start moving down the field. Jaden Daniels is clicking. They're picking up, 10, 11 yards at a time. And I'm looking at this thinking to myself, if they go down and score a touchdown, would they go for two? Because if they miss, they're still up 4. It would have been 16-12. And if they make it, you go up 18-12. And now you force the Eagles into Nick Sirianni decision-making mode again, where it's like, if Philly gets the ball back and puts a decent drive together, but then they get one of these weird 4th and 5, 4th and 6 scenarios, and a field goal would have the lead where you could then get the ball back and get another field goal to tie it. I was thinking to myself, maybe Dan Quinn is, going to potentially tie Nick Sirianni up in a pretzel here, kind of sink him, under his own poor decision-making. But then that is not what happened. And because I missed the third quarter, I'm watching this drive, and they're moving the ball, and all of a sudden, they get off of the pass, and they get stoned a couple of times on running plays. And now it's 4th and short. They're well within field goal range. I think on the broadcast, they said it would have been like a 44 or 45-yard kick. And my assumption was maybe I missed. Obviously, I could see the score was 12-10, so clearly Washington had kicked a field goal earlier. But I'm thinking maybe I missed something in that third quarter and Zane Gonzalez got injured, because to be trailing 12-10, and at that point I want to say there were like 9 or 10 minutes left, somewhere in that range, to not kick the field goal and go for it, I thought there must be something wrong with the kicker, right? Remember earlier this season, Washington was on the flip side of that when they beat the Giants at home. I want to say maybe they kicked 7 field goals that game, and Graham Gano for the Giants got injured, and so basically the Giants had to play that game early on in Washington with no kicker, and they ultimately lost because they had to go for 2 after each touchdown, and they also did not have the option to kick field goals. So on the 4th down play, as I said, they run 2 plays, get nowhere. On the 4th down play, I can't remember if it was the right guard or the right tackle, but one of those guys very clearly pulled around to the left. It was the play where Jaden Daniels bobbled the snap and the play was just doomed from the beginning. So that tells me they were going to run yet another rushing play when they had it going in the passing game, and they were stalled themselves out with the run, and ultimately it doesn't work. Daniels bobbles the snap. He tries to get to the outside. There's no blocking on that side, and he just gets crushed over by the sideline. It kind of reminded me of the RG3 days when he wouldn't just get tackled, or, some guys are really good. I'm thinking about Russell Wilson in his prime, where he could take off running, pick up 8 to 10 yards, and kind of take a glancing blow as he goes out of bounds. Whereas RG3, every time he got tackled, it was like a car crash. And that's kind of what it looked like on that play with Jaden Daniels. And that was pretty much the game. Now, it turned out Zane Gonzalez was not injured, and Dan Quinn just decided that, they were going to go for the touchdown there. Comes back to bite him. Saquon Barkley, very next drive, scores on the long run. Now Washington is down 9. They come back out on offense. Daniels throws a pick on the very first play of the drive. 2 plays later, another Saquon Barkley long run for a touchdown. And that was it. Washington did end up getting a garbage time touchdown, but the game was in hand at that point. The Eagles are now 8-2, and the difference this year is Saquon Barkley. Last year, they actually, from a record standpoint, had even a better start. I want to say they were 10-1 before, the wheels fell off of that thing. But I don't think we're going to see that this year. They are 8-2. They're a game and a half up in the division. Now, they do play Washington one more time. So, theoretically, if Washington can beat Philadelphia, right now that means there's only a half game separating them the rest of the way. I don't see, I think this thing is Philadelphia's to win. They're in the driver's seat. Saquon Barkley, we've talked about it before, just a complete mismanagement, one of the worst roster decisions we've ever seen. Joe Shane just letting Saquon walk. That is, every time he dominates, which, let's face it, has been mostly every week this year, especially against the Giants. The Eagles still have to play the Giants again. But Saquon Barkley is the best, if not one of the best, running backs in the league. And for the Eagles to have him this year, they didn't lose anything, right? It's basically the same offense that they've had now for the last few years, and they've added Barkley. So I really don't think we're going to see that 2023 type collapse. Now, there's still a lot of season left, but when you're running the ball like that and you've got a quarterback who Jalen Hurts he's not a top 5 quarterback, but he's clearly dangerous in the open field. To have him running the ball, to always have the threat of the tush push when you need a short yardage conversion, to have one of the best running backs in the league, to have Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Goddard. This Eagles offense is looking really, really good. The offensive line is kicking ass. The defense seems to just get better and better each week. You've heard a lot about, over the years, right, Fangio's defense is, somewhat complicated to learn, but it sure seems like they've got it rolling. They're really just stifling every team they've played recently. And so Eagles in the driver's seat look like they should win the NFC East. Dallas sucks this year, so you don't have that added pressure of last year where even though the Eagles should have won the division, you're kind of looking over your shoulder going, man, every game we drop, Dallas is picking one up. That's not the case this year. It's pretty much just Philadelphia and Washington. And Washington with a rookie quarterback and a defense that is just, I don't think this defense is capable of winning games for them. So they are going to need Jaden Daniels and this offense to win games. And one of the things we've seen with Cliff Kingsbury, and this is something to keep an eye on, historically, even going back to his time in Arizona, they do not play as well offensively in the second half of the season. It's like defensive coordinators are catching up to him at that point. There's enough tape out there for them to make adjustments, and the Kingsbury offenses just aren't as good towards the end of the year as they are in the first half. So the NFC East comes down to Philadelphia and Washington. Right now, looks like it's going to be Philadelphia taking it. Some comments on the fight between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Netflix, live sports, streaming. I will say this. I thought it was pretty cool. There was a lot of buzz. And we'll get into some of the streaming issues in a second here. But in terms of the event, it felt big time. AT&T Stadium in Arlington. Jerry Jones was on set. Michael Irvin. Tons of big names on hand in the crowd. They showed Micah Parsons at one point. Now, obviously, with the reschedule, it put the match right in the heart of football season. So you had to have it on a Friday night, so you're not running up against college football. It was originally scheduled for July 20th, which was a Saturday, but then you had the issues with, I want to say it was an ulcer with Mike Tyson, so it ultimately had to be delayed. And in the meat of football season, you cannot have an event like this going up against arguably the second largest sport in our country, which is college football. But in terms of the product, I thought it was good. I watched all four fights. I thought the undercard really delivered. The Barrios Ramos split decision was one of the better fights I've seen in a long time. I mean, those guys were getting after it. That was as competitive a match as I've seen in a long time. The co-main event was also a battle between Serrano and Taylor. I thought those ladies, they brought it. That was really hyped up. And if you didn't see that first fight between those two, you might not have understood why it was such a big deal. But wow, that thing absolutely delivered. Super competitive. They were throwing haymakers. Just two tough women in the ring. And you can make the argument that was the best fight of the night. Now, the main event, from a pure boxing perspective, it was not that intriguing. It was from the standpoint that you have one of the best ever in Mike Tyson going up against a YouTube guy turned pro boxer who was 30 years his junior. Now, I don't really know much about the YouTube celebrities. I don't keep up with what's going on in that universe. But obviously, I'm aware Jake Paul is a really big deal. And, he grew his brand from the YouTube brand, initial years or content that he created. And from what we've seen in his boxing career, he's pretty good. Now, how that would stack up against heavyweights currently in their prime, that would be a different story. Like, he's not beating Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury or Usyk, but he's held his own in his boxing career thus far. He's 12-1, and he's had some impressive knockouts. So he's obviously serious about this. Now, in terms of the Netflix stream, it was rough. Had it on in the background, and I could not count how many times it would cut out. I could hear the audio just stop. I was not facing the television, but I had it on. The audio would cut out, and I just knew that, oh, okay, this thing is buffering. And at first I thought it was my internet. But then on one of the stoppages, I saw the closed captioning just continue to go real time, as if the closed captioning was capturing the actual fights going on in the undercard, but the picture was completely stalled. So while the picture or the audio was frozen, you would continue to see the closed captioning update in real time. And then I went to X, and it confirmed it was not my internet. Everybody was having issues watching the fight, and in terms of the viewing experience, it was choppy. And I just thought, if this fight was originally scheduled for July and it gets pushed to November, how in the hell do you have this many issues putting on the fight with minimal disruption? I totally get that when it's a stream, everybody is accessing it via the same place. But if you really want it to be that big, then how is it, when it becomes that big, an issue for you to support? I thought that was piss poor. Now, leading up to the main event, that was, I would say, the worst in terms of the feed going in and out and just glitching and buffering. I would say it must have froze at least 4 or 5 times during the ring walks. So you had Paul going in, you had Tyson going in, and at least a handful of times I was having to do the, get out of the production to back to the Netflix homepage, go back in, it fires up, and then 30, 40 seconds later, it glitches again, and I have to repeat the process. That was very frustrating. And that was happening kind of throughout the undercard in those matches, which really were competitive. But every now and then you would get that kind of spinning wheel where you would see, it's 25% loading, it's 50% loading, it's 86% loading. But then it never picks up. And the fact that we were subjected to that in the undercard, in my mind, I'm like, well, this could be my internet, and let's get this sorted out before the main event starts, because I want to be locked into the feed when that goes. And that was not the case. At a certain point, I went in on my phone, which was not connected to Wi-Fi, so I'm using, and I had full bars, right? So we're talking full 5G, and I go into Netflix on my phone, and I cannot get in. And at that point, it's like, okay, this isn't an internet issue. This is a Netflix cannot handle the traffic issue. So I fired up the old X, and sure enough, I could just see, and I had to laugh because the internet is undefeated, but I saw a bunch of people complaining, obviously throwing up the memes, pretty lighthearted, but it was like, we knew this was coming, and it's a disaster. Like, we cannot hold a consistent feed. How is this possible? How are you hyping this fight between one of the best, most famous heavyweight boxers of all time, and then this guy who, look, whatever you think of Jake Paul, he's a big-time celebrity, and he's held his own in the boxing realm. Like, this isn't he tried to give it a shot here. Like, no, like, coming into the fight, the guy has established himself as a legitimate boxer. How are we at this point where we can't keep the stream online? Where the graphics are glitched. I mean, at a certain, we're looking like, it's like, is this Nintendo 64 here? Like, what the hell is going on with the quality of the feed? And then as soon as the feed would straighten out and you get back to your high def, it would cut out. And then you get the spinning wheel of death. Oh, it's 25% loading. I mean, what the hell was that? So, again, leading up to the fight, I want to say during the ring walks, it must have been a handful of times at least where I had to back out of the fight to the Netflix main screen, re-enter the fight. It would load, everything would seem good, and then we would glitch again. Now, I will say, during the fight, it's like once the action got going, once that bell rung in the first round, I believe things went smoothly. I don't recall having to, pause or do, kind of the back and back in that I was doing in the undercard. But yeah, I thought they could have had that more dialed in. The main event was, and I know, other people are probably going to share this same opinion. The main event was probably the least competitive fight of the evening. Now, the first fight, I think Goyat he's on Jake Paul's production. I mean, he dominated that fight. So you could say in terms of competitiveness or, lopsided, that fight was pretty lopsided. The main event was also lopsided, but it just you didn't see a ton of action. I've, over the last, call it 2 to 3 years, I've really gotten into the ESPN Top Rank promotion, and a lot of those fights are the lightweight, featherweight, welterweight guys where the speed is just really compelling. And most people don't understand, especially if that was the first boxing match that you've watched. A heavyweight boxing match is not necessarily the most, or I should say the most impressive display of athleticism. I mean, these guys are throwing powerful punches, but it's in no way as athletic, dynamic, hand speed that you would see with these smaller guys. And that's why I say I think ESPN Top Rank promotions have really delivered over these last few years, because in combat sports, size is relevant, right? Or I should say relative. The fighters are grouped on their weights. So whether it's MMA or whether it's boxing, when you're watching two guys go at it, and we'll use boxing as an example, whether they are lightweight, 5'8" dudes weighing 135 pounds going at each other, or in this case, heavyweights at, I know Tyson's not the tallest dude in the world, but 5'10", 5'11", 230 versus Paul at 6'1", 230. The speed and the dynamic, the athleticism is just not going to be there in a heavyweight bout versus what you're going to see in a lightweight or a cruiserweight or a welterweight bout. And I thought the main event showed that, where you just saw two guys who were trying to throw big punches. Obviously, Paul crushed Tyson. I mean, he threw more punches. He landed more punches, much more efficient. But the action and the speed, it's not what it is when you watch the smaller fighters go at it. So overall, I'll give Paul credit. I saw some numbers that said at the peak it was 65 million were tuned in, but they averaged something like 60 million throughout the fight. That is a massive number. So credit to him, credit to the promotion. They got it done. Friday night fight versus, usually big time combat sports, Saturday nights, but given where we're at in the football season, this thing had to go off on a Friday, and that was a big number. So give credit to Paul and his promotion. I saw the numbers before that said he stood to gain 40 million, Tyson 20 million. Overall, I thought it was a success. There were some hiccups, right? I mean, there were Jerry Jones's mic on some of the pre-fight action, right? Like it was cut out. Give Michael Irvin credit. He was Johnny on the spot. Traded mics with Jerry, making sure that the thing stayed on the tracks. But yeah, I would say overall a success, especially with those kind of numbers. But Netflix 100% needs to reevaluate and get this shit tightened up for the NFL Christmas games. They have 2 games on Christmas, both of which are absolutely going to have an impact on the playoffs and seeding, and they should be competitive games. And I understand, again, the numbers were like $60 million people were tuned in watching the fight on average. And that is not what you typically see in an NFL game, even on Sunday Night Football. But on Christmas Day, with competitive games that are going to impact how things shake out in the playoffs, and people are going to be home, whether or not you're actively watching the game or you just have it on in the background, there's going to be a lot of people tuned in. And even the folks who don't celebrate Christmas, it is a national holiday, so they are also going to be home. So whether it does 60 million plus, we'll see. But when you're talking the NFL, and at that, meaningful NFL games, you 100% have to have that go off without a hitch. You cannot have the broadcast glitching. You cannot have the spinning wheel of death, 25% buffering thing come up. Because in football, imagine the ball is in the air on a deep fade, and all of a sudden the broadcast cuts out and it's giving you the spinning wheel. Nobody wants to see that. That is not what we wish to see with our football. So credit to Netflix and the Jake Paul promotion for how big this thing was on Friday night. But if you're going to air 2 games on a national holiday that are going to be consequential to the playoffs, you need to get this sorted out. And we cannot have, whether it's poor quality, whether it's buffering, whether it's just a glitch in the action, that cannot happen when you have the NFL games.